Hey everyone, I thought I would come to you with a little bit of supplemental intro to PR type stuff because some things are happening, some sort of historical moments are happening right now at time of recording this, which is on Wednesday, August 26th, 2020 at about 3:30 p.m. The Milwaukee Bucks, the NBA franchise team, have decided to boycott the Game 5 of the NBA playoffs against the Orlando Magic. They were up 3-1 in the series. Details like that don't really matter. In response to everything that's happening in Kenosha. For those of you who are maybe less familiar with Kenosha, Kenosha is a city that is just south of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. And for those of you who are less acquainted with the political components of this, there was an individual who was shot in the back 7 times. Video footage was released. From what we've read so far and what we've heard, that individual is paralyzed from the waist down, to be determined how that unfolds with his health. But in the aftermath of what was happening in Kenosha, and you could read all about this literally anywhere on the internet, there was civil unrest, and there were, unfortunately, a 17-year-old teen from Antioch, Illinois, which is in the north suburbs of Illinois, brought an AR-15 to the protests and looting, and shot and killed 2 people, injured a third. He has been arrested by the Antioch police. So there's a lot of things happening, right? Things from the George Floyd case carrying on over to the circumstances with Black Lives Matter. The NBA in particular is a predominantly African-American league. And so with that comes an immense amount of burden to represent the community well. And in the case of the Milwaukee Bucks, and the reason that I'm making this, there are some circumstances wherein there's so much interconnected with the city of Milwaukee itself and the players as well. And for those of you who aren't basketball fans, I'll give you just a bit of historical context, the web that connects all these pieces. The Milwaukee Bucks have the Defensive Player of the Year, soon to be named the Most Valuable Player of the Year, a player by the name of Giannis Antetokounmpo. He is a stud. I have his shirt somewhere. I'm wearing a Nike basketball shirt right now, conveniently. Obviously did not plan with the appearance and everything. But so they have Giannis, the best player in the league. They have a player by the name of Sterling Brown, who in 2018, fact check that for me, in 2018 was tased, was victimized by the police in Milwaukee, and he was the officers were penalized for the mishandling of that situation. He was in a Walgreens parking lot. Again, fact check that, but I think those are the correct details. The coach of the Bucks is a guy by the name of Mike Budenholzer. Coach Budenholzer was the coach of the Atlanta Hawks in 2017 when a player, Thabo Sefolosha, was at the victim had his hand broken or his leg broken by the New York City police outside of a club. So there's a lot of these interconnected pieces that have to do with their black players as part of a black community who are wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. Two of those people, one of them directly and then one of them indirectly, somebody who had coached another person, have been directly impacted by police brutality. So it's not just this word service that police brutality is a real thing. It is actual circumstance wherein these people are directly affected by it. And so when we're thinking about public relations, what is the obligation of the Bucks as a franchise to say something? What is the obligation of the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver? What is his obligation to say something? What we're really trying to focus on is what those messages are going to look like from this point on. And so what I'd like to do, and this is what I would typically do at the beginning of a class if we were in person, is I would basically task you with this. Everyone take out your computers, get into little clusters of 2 to 3, maybe 4 people, one person with a laptop, one person taking notes, and try to track down all the different ways that this story is being manipulated, it's being controlled, it's being told. And then most importantly, try to think about the public relations person, somebody who is hired at the front office of the NBA, the front office of the Milwaukee Bucks, the front office of probably any of the Milwaukee sports teams, let's say the Brewers. What are they doing? What are they saying? What are maybe teams, let's say a little bit north of Milwaukee in Green Bay? Are the Packers doing anything? So when we envision public relations, what we're really trying to think about is all the potential people who could be involved in acting. And sometimes, and this isn't to say that these specific sports franchises will do this, but sometimes people will try to ride the wave of the hot button issue of the day. Unfortunately, some people do that in a negative way. And as a result of that, we can see the spin component that typically exists in the negative narrative about public relations. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, in real time, bring us to the screen, what we would typically do in class. And we're just going to click, I already typed in Bucks, we're going to click News. And we are going to see the first ESPN article. I don't want to get flagged down by copyright issues. But literally just looking at all the people who are telling the story, looking at the subject line, Bucks boycotting Game 5 versus Magic to protest shooting of Jacob Blake. Same, basically copy-paste version of the subject line. The Atlantic, Bucks decide to boycott Game 5. No mention of Jacob Blake, who is at the core a person who was shot 7 times in the back by the police in Kenosha. CBS Sports, updates being live. Washington Post boycotts the game to protest social injustice. Okay, so now all of a sudden the Washington Post is reporting this, is that they're protesting social injustice. People like Bleacher Report or ESPN, whoever's writing those stories 31 minutes ago, 36 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago, the framing of that not only impacts the way that the story is told, obviously, but also impacts the way that the search engine picks things up. If we were to go on Twitter, for instance, and look at what's happening on Twitter, we would probably see a different telling of that story. But we keep going. We think about not only the big name national syndicate things like a Washington Post or ESPN, but we think about specific regional things like the Milwaukee Sentinel, right? The Sentinel is a really prominent news article, journal in the Milwaukee area. These regional TV stations are writing the thing. So the reason that I bring all this up, and then at the bottom, Giannis wins Defensive Player of the Year. So the reason that I bring all this up is I would task you in a traditional classroom setting, if we had class today or we had class tomorrow morning and we would recap the story, we would know more, right? We're only 30 minutes. I was literally about to hop in the shower when I saw it trending on my phone. We're 30 minutes of this story being unfolded. So what I would typically do for this, even though we haven't even gotten to that point yet in terms of learning the formatting or the structure or the skeleton of press releases, I would task you with highlighting a specific bullet points. What are the 3 or 4 or 5 major details if you were tasked with being the PR person for the Bucks? What are the 3 or 4 major details that you want to include in a statement that goes out to the public? Okay? Conversely, I would want you to think about this from a different lens, which is imagine somebody who is already, let's say, anti-Black Lives Matter, or is really a proponent of shut up and dribble. Somebody who doesn't want politics to interfere with their viewing of sports. They think sports should be this entertainment factor, politics should be separated, very clear line in the middle. Knowing those things, knowing that people will react that way, people who buy tickets to your games, people who own jerseys and merchandise for your team, knowing what they might say, how would that change the way that you frame the major points of the story? And again, if we're thinking about an internal, a corporate PR person, somebody who's responsible for just the Milwaukee Bucks franchise, who would you leverage within the organization to get a quote from? Would you get the coach to make a statement about police brutality, about the injustice that's happening in your local community? It's like 30 miles south of Milwaukee. I used to pass it every day when I was commuting between Milwaukee and Chicago. Do you get the MVP, the best player, the most prominent player on your team in the Eastern Conference? Do you get him to make a statement? Do you get a statement from somebody like Sterling Brown, who has been victimized by police brutality? What do you do? Do you get the president of the Bucks to say something? What do you want them to say? How do you leverage their voices to speak to the community? Because at the end of the day, what is the goal of this communication message? What do we want people who receive this message to do? What do we want them to think? How do we want them to feel? Think about the emotions. How do we want them to feel in regard to our specific brand, our franchise? What does our brand stand for? What is our mission statement? What is our values? How do we leverage those? So if you were somebody who were to go through that process, and I'll look this up right now, if I just look up something like, let's look up Milwaukee Bucks statements. Let's see if I could find that. Here we go. We'll pull this up. Switch screens. Statement from the Milwaukee Bucks. This was August 24th, so this was 2 days ago. And sorry if you can't see this, so I'll read it aloud. Statement from the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks organization is praying for the recovery of Jacob Blake, who was shot multiple times in the back by a police officer at point-blank range in Kenosha, Wisconsin yesterday. Our hearts go out to his family and friends. We stand firmly against reoccurring issues of excessive use of force and immediate escalation when engaging the black community. Pretty sure black should be capitalized, PR person at Milwaukee. Our organization will continue to stand for all black lives as we demand accountability and systemic change on behalf of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sylville Smith, Ernest Lacey, Dontre Hamilton, Tony Robinson, Joel Acevedo, and other countless victims. We will work to enact policy change so incidents like this no longer exist. Okay, so let's think about the naming conventions of the people. Bringing up people like George Floyd, the most prominent name right now, Breonna Taylor, and so on. Think about the value added in terms of evoking emotion within this. What's fascinating to me is I'm looking at a very basic statement from the organization. I would revisit that if I was making a statement right now, right? I would think about how can I go back to the statement that was made 2 days prior, that is an official statement from the brand. How can I use that statement and revisit the language? How much of that, and this, by the way, isn't me suggesting sort of like self-plagiarism, but how much of that repeated message, that consistency within our statements needs to be reiterated? For instance, this idea of we firmly stand against reoccurring issues of excessive use of force and immediate escalation when engaging the black community. What I would do if I was a PR person, I would immediately copy and paste that somewhere in the document and think about our reiteration, us pointing back to this isn't just a reactionary thing. We have said this before, and that's where continuity is really important when it comes to a brand talking about the things that they believe in, the values, and the people themselves. And you can point back to a message. 2 days ago, we made it very clear that we will not stand for this. We will do everything in our power as a brand, as a community, as professional athletes to connect and restore some sort of justice within the community. Then this happens. Then this kid from Antioch comes and kills 2 people. What do we do now? Well, the thing that we do is we protest peacefully, we boycott the game, and this is why it's important, and this is what this is what it represents, and this is why it's a big deal. So again, this would be typically like a 15 to 20 minute activity. I would have a 5-minute intro at the beginning to give you some names and people and faces and details about the story. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with it. But then I'd let you go off, even though we don't have the skills yet. You all have probably come across public statements, public apologies, something that a brand is trying to communicate and convey to the public. Now, the public, and this is when we talked about the naming convention of public relations, what public or publics, which of the publics are you trying to satisfy and appeal to? Are you looking at this as a broad generic statement for all people who are Bucks fans? Maybe, maybe not. Are you trying to use this as a message to establish and maintain goodwill with specific publics within the Milwaukee Bucks franchise fandom? Probably. So when you're thinking about specific segments of people that you're targeting with the messaging, what you want to make sure you're doing as a PR person is establishing precisely from the beginning who it is that you're targeting, why you want them to get this message, and what is the value add to the brand. We're not just trying to bolster our brand, we're also trying to make a statement because we have the immediate power and impact. People are watching. This guy, Giannis, has literally just been crowned the Defensive Player of the Year. He had a press conference with Shaquille O'Neal digitally, okay? That happened 24 hours ago. Now, that was 24 hours after Jacob Blake was shot. Now, we're in the circumstance where every single day something related to police brutality is coming up in your community. Community is the key word. They are geographically close to you as a franchise. You have to make it a point to reiterate community, trust, we are with you, and that's the important emotive language that we have to use to help communicate that message. So, that's what we would have done. Unfortunately, we aren't in person, we're online, and tomorrow we're meeting in groups. So hopefully this was a good insight to help get you to reflect and think about how PR can happen in real time. 30 minutes after a decision like boycotting the game actually occurs, something dramatic happens, statements are being made, news stories are writing about social justice versus protesting the shooting and police brutality involving Jacob Blake. What are the implications of that? So those are all the things that we need to be thinking about from this point on in the semester. And I'm sure I'll get plenty of questions and ideas and comments. So I'm looking forward to those. All right. Thanks, everyone.